and I upset Johnny Liston, and I just turned 22 years old. I must be the greatest. I told the world, I talk to God every day. If God's with the king, no matter if you're against the day. I shook up the world. I shook up the world. I shook up the world. I shook up the world.
I said, can I be a legend? Search your soul and answer me this question. Do you think I have what it takes to be great, but still be humble and learn from my mistakes? I said, can I be a legend?
Our special guest tonight, Christine Brennan, joining us all the way from Washington, D.C. She's a columnist with USA Today, a commentator with CNN, ABC, and PBS NewsHour, a best-selling author. She's been to 18 Olympic Games, and she has a number of firsts to her name. The first woman writer at the Miami Herald in 1981, and the first woman to cover the Washington's NFL team as a staff writer for the Washington Post in 1985. Good evening to you once again, Christine.
Yeah,
Now, Christine,
you.
you are heralded as one of the pioneers of female sports journalism. As female sports journalists like myself, in some way or the other, we would have come across you, whether it be in research, in articles, and so forth, particularly as it relates to the NFL. But how would you sum up your overall journey? How difficult was it?
I don't see it as difficult at all, even though I know that, certainly times were different when I started. Coming out of Northwestern University, and nothing was going to stop me. I so wanted to be a sports journalist, and I was given great opportunities at the Miami Herald, Washington Post, USA Today, the networks you described, ABC, CNN, etc. And sure, there were moments, especially in those early days, because it was still very rare that women would be covering sports, and so people didn't understand that we were there to do our jobs, and that the locker room was the workplace, and that's why women had to have the equal access to the locker room, just as men. Obviously, the locker room is a very unusual workplace, but it is a workplace nonetheless. And so, there were certainly incidents and things that happened back in the early 80s, but overall, I have always been living the life of my dreams, the career of just the adventure of a lifetime. And so I like to look at all the positives, which are many. And we also knew that things would get better, because the more women who got into sports journalism, the more men who accepted women in sports journalism. The sports editors, almost all of them men when I first started, who encouraged me and gave me assignments and sent me to the Olympics and sent me to the Super Bowl and Wimbledon and all those things, that got me on my way. And so it just was a matter of time. And I think that the nation, maybe the world, catching up with the ambition of young women and with the ability of young women, as well as men, of course, to be able to succeed in sports journalism. And so I'm very fortunate to have had women who came before me, who opened doors that I walked through. And then obviously I feel very strongly about making sure that the next generation and the generation after that have opportunities that I have. And that's why I speak out so much about women in sports media, and am very active in mentoring young women and men too. So, but all in all, it's the most amazing journey. I could never have imagined this as a teenager, that this would be my career, and that, as you would say, I've been to 18 Olympics in a row, winter and summer, from LA in '84 all the way through to Pyeongchang in 2018. And I would have been in Tokyo, which would have ended yesterday, but instead we look forward to 2021, and hopefully we can get the virus under control and make it possible that we can have an Olympics in 2021 in Tokyo. So again, you're looking at a very, very fortunate, very lucky, and very, very happy professional who's been able to just, as I said, live the career of my dreams.
Now I'm going to put you right into the Washington football team was back in the news, first of all, for their name change, but more pointedly, some sexual harassment allegations emanating out of that unit, and some subsequent, changes, etc. There's been some fallout. Now, you would have been in that environment in the 1980s, and you've written extensively about it. Were you surprised that, much of the same still existed?
I was, only in the sense that it's kind of hard to believe that, it's not hard to believe that these happen, but the magnitude and the breadth of that, when you're talking about I believe it was 15 women and then 2 journalists, so 17 women counting the 2 journalists, but 15 employees, and then women who were sports writers. And the sexual harassment and abuse, verbal abuse, whatever, is just unacceptable in any form, much less for one person, much less for that many. And so that was appalling. Thankfully, the difference is in the past, people didn't pay attention or didn't care. Now people pay attention. Now they get outraged. Men lose their jobs. And you certainly see scenarios where there's just a very different reaction, which is wonderful to see. So while it's horrifying that this was taking place, allegedly, the Washington Post reporting was excellent. Liz Clark was one of the 2 reporters on it, and she's a good friend and just an excellent reporter. And I know other Post people worked on it as well. And I'm so glad those women came forward and felt comfortable coming forward, which is another big change. And again, the results and the action was swift, and that's great news. Obviously, that was the same week as the racist name of the team was changed. And so you're having a bad week if you're an NFL team, and the racist nickname is not the worst news of the week. but I was not saying that name for 7 years. I just refused to say the R word. Racist. It's awful, demeaning, absolutely a terrible name. And thankfully, that changed from pressure from the corporations that got money talked, and that's okay because the result was the important thing. And then a few days later, of course, was this Washington Post exclusive, this expose that really shed a light on the problems in the organization. And let's hope that changes are coming. It looks like they already are, but I mean, major change. And but yes, I dealt with some of these things in the 80s. I wrote about them. It's on Twitter if people want to look at those stories a million years ago. And yet certainly some sexual harassment, absolutely. But back then in the 80s, who was I going to tell? I didn't want to derail my career. I'm going to start complaining and then someone says, well, just don't even go out there anymore. Just we'll take you off the beat. No, I wasn't going to do that. So back then we took it. Women accepted it. We just kept going. And now, thankfully, women know they can speak out. They have a voice. There's a forum like the Washington Post listening. Reporters want to hear those stories, and there's instant reaction. And I think that's a wonderful positive step. I think that is progress.
Christine, you mentioned about your time there. I guess you glossed over it a bit. Do you feel comfortable talking about your own personal experiences with what they would term now as toxic masculinity within that Washington franchise?
Sure, Justin, absolutely. Yeah, and I did write about this. And yes, for example, the owner of the team at the time, Jack Kent Cooke, would come out to practice, and it was just me and then male reporters who were also, I became very friendly with, obviously, even though we were also competitors, but we're all together all the time. And Jack Kent Cooke would shake everyone's hand, but when he came to me, he would pat me on my head, which was hard for him to do because I'm 5'11", and he was about 5'6" or something. So he had to really reach up to pat me, on the top of the head. And then he would lean in to kiss me, and thankfully I turned my head, so I took it on the cheek. That happened a couple times before he got the hint to also shake my hand. But again, I'm sure people are saying, well, why wouldn't you complain? Why wouldn't I go to the Washington Post and say, you've got to tell the team to have him stop this? We didn't do that back then, folks. This was 1985, 86, 87. That would have just probably sealed the deal for me, that it wasn't even in my mindset to mention it. And so I devised a way to kind of avoid it. And pretty soon the owner of the team was shaking my hand, as he should have all along. And I also never let this bother me because, again, back then we dealt with stuff and we moved on. And nothing, as I said, was going to deter me from this dream that I had. Nothing was going to take me off the beat. This was the plum assignment of all plum assignments, the Washington Post covering the NFL team. No way was I going to jeopardize that in any way, shape, or form. There were several players that asked me out in the locker room. Some were married, some not. I was able to fend that off pretty easily. I could just say, hey, I cover the team. No, I'm not going to go out on dates with you. The general manager at the time, Bobby Beathard, who had a great reputation, he looked at me early on. He said, it ruins everything that you're out here. meaning basically that a woman is being sent out to cover the team.
Wow.
Can you imagine that being said in 2020?
No.
But in 1985, he felt very comfortable saying that to me, and I, of course, told him, "Don't worry about it; it's no problem at all." And it wasn't to me, and somehow it was a problem to him. Now, I will say this: Joe Gibbs, the head coach of the team, won 3 Super Bowls, and I think you can make a case as the greatest NFL coach ever because he won those 3 Super Bowls with 3 different quarterbacks, not a one of whom will ever make the Hall of Fame. Joe Theismann, Doug Williams, and Mark Rippon. And so a pretty remarkable coach, one of the greats of all time. And Joe Gibbs was great. He didn't necessarily want me in the locker room, but once the NFL said that I had to be in the locker room, he said, we will abide by the rules. He treated me equally in every way. If he was angry about a story, because the Washington Post was the big paper, of course, he'd call me in the morning and complain or say something, and then he'd say, okay, I'll see you out there. We're fine now. And everything good? I said, yep, everything's good, coach, after his early morning call. And then I'd see him out there at the park, and we'd move right on. And he was honest and fair and respectful and wonderful to deal with. So I only have great things to say about Joe Gibbs, one of the great class acts in sports. And there were a lot of other players, as well as Coach Gibbs, a lot of other players who were really wonderful to deal with and very respectful. So I had a lot of that as well. But I guess the worst was when someone within the organization, we'll leave it at that, who I was working late in at the park, was in a room all by myself. Everyone else had gone home. And I feel a presence over me, and I kind of look up, and it's this, we'll just say a member of the team, Washington NFL team organization. And he asked me if I was going to be on the road trip. And of course I said yes, because I covered the team. Of course I was going on every road trip. And he goes, will you be in our hotel? And yes, I would, because the beat writers actually stayed in the hotel. It just made it easier. The Washington Post paid for the hotel room, of course. And he goes, well, do you want to get together? And I was like, no. And then he asked if he could kiss me, and I said no. And I mean, I'm on deadline. I'm doing my job. And of course, that is the very definition of sexual harassment and workplace harassment. But again, I didn't, other than putting it in the story after the fact, I didn't even think to tell my editors. Now, of course, anyone who's watching or listening to us now, you must tell your editors. And if there's a problem, you can always find me at ChristineBrennan.com. That's my website. And I see an email, I check it out and click on contact me and fill that out, and I get that within a few minutes. If you have any problems, anyone out there, women or men, dealing with anything, I'm here for you, for sure. Happy to help in any way. And it's very different now than what I was describing back then.
So you've described like decades long of that type of behavior. So then, knowing Dan Snyder for these years, how much is he to blame, would you say, for the current state of affairs within the franchise?
I'm sorry, how much is Dan Snyder to blame?
Right, because it's not to alleviate him of the issues, but you've been, profiling decades of issues there. So then he comes and he's been the owner from 1999, I think. So then how much of the current situation would you put on the owner, Dan Snyder, right now?
Yeah, I think at the end of the day, Dan Snyder, I mean, the buck stops there, right? He's the owner. Let me put it this way. If I were the owner of that team, I would be mortified. I would hopefully have had a better handle of what was going on. If Dan Snyder, if there's a review going on that he's paid for, but so we hope it's independent enough. We'll see. But if we find out that Dan Snyder knew, then I think he should be forced to sell the team, just as Jerry Richardson was with the Carolina Panthers. Each story is different. Donald Sterling with, of course, the LA Clippers was forced. Yeah, you can force owners out. It's a rare thing, but you can. So my take on it is that Snyder either should have known, or if he knew, he did nothing. Either way, to me, I would hope he would no longer be the owner of the team. I just think, and then plus, of course, he went along with the racist name for so long. And of course said the infamous line, never. He would never, all caps, change the name of the team. That was in 2013 to my colleague Eric Brady from USA Today. Obviously never all of a sudden happened. So much for never, because now the name has changed. So I mean, I think Dan Snyder's leadership is in question throughout here, and I would certainly hope that once everything is investigated and all the reporting is done, that if he knew any of this, or even if he should have known about it, I would hope that the NFL would look seriously into replacing him. I know that sounds very dramatic, but this is important. This is very, very important. The name, the racist name for all those years that he defended, and of course, the way women were being treated in that both very big issues, and both worthy of our attention for sure.
Now, Christine, you were recently a part of some sessions put on by the International Sport Press Association, IAPS, which focused specifically on women and sport journalism. Now, in those sessions, sometimes I got the sense that, persons were saying women should not see themselves as female journalists, but as journalists, without the labels, and that there shouldn't be any special provisions or special considerations in recruitment, etc. But what is your take on that? Do you think women need that extra hand to get into and flourish in a sport?
Marcia, I think that certainly we want to give every opportunity for the underrepresented gender to have more opportunities and to open doors for them. And right now, of course, in sports journalism, women are the underrepresented gender. It's not 50-50 male, female. It's not even close. In fact, in the US, it's probably more like, 85-15%, something like that. Maybe, 12-15% women in sports media, in sports journalism jobs, in newspapers. I think we see more women on television. If you turn on ESPN or local news, I mean, often you see women delivering local sports news now in cities around the country. It's certainly, I would wish it were more and better. The problem is the bottom is falling out of the economy, of course, not only with the pandemic, but before that, even in 2008 with the newspaper business, all the way back then. And when the economy had its terrible times back then in 2008. And so there's not a sports editor in the country who wouldn't want to hire women of color, or white women like myself. I mean, obviously the idea is diversity. The idea is as many voices as you can have. So obviously men of color, women of color, this is what you want. You want your newsroom to look like the metropolitan area that you're covering.
Yeah.
So any sports editor would love to hire more women, but they can't. I mean, right now we're losing jobs. We're not gaining jobs. So I do really feel that it's a difficult time. I'm not necessarily just cutting the slack for those sports editors and giving them some slack here. Or excuses. I don't mean to be, but I do believe that they all would love to hire more women and more other minorities and people of color. And I just think in some ways it's just so difficult now because the economic times are so difficult. But yes, I think in general, I have never thought of myself as a woman sports writer. Obviously, clearly I am a woman and I'm a sports writer, but I've kind of thought of myself as a sports journalist who happens to be a woman. So I had a compliment early on when I was starting my career at the Miami Herald from one of my best friends and a real mentor to me, a man named Shelby Strother, who passed away many years ago due to cancer. And he said to me, if I didn't read your byline and read the name Christine Brennan, but if you didn't read the byline, he said, I would think a man wrote that story. And he meant that as a compliment, and I took it as a compliment. By that, I mean, I know there's people out there, this wasn't your question, Marcia, exactly, but that think, women will write a better feature story or be softer or gentler or something. To me, that is a bunch of malarkey. Women can be strong and tough, and I find that to be bordering on sexism, and that's what concerns me when we do have those stereotypes about a female journalist versus a male journalist. I've seen some of the softest, most emotional writing done by men, and I've seen some of the hardest, toughest writing done by women. So I reject the notion that there is a way to do this, but I do not reject the notion of the helping hand and the encouragement that women need. Until we get to 50-50 male-female, which is not going to happen in my lifetime. I hope it happens in yours, but I'm not so sure it will. But even if we get close, even if we get to 40-60 female-male in journalism or in sports journalism, which again, we're a long way from that, that's still not 50-50. So I absolutely believe, just as I would help any young man, I certainly am known, I guess, for mentoring and helping young women who want to be in journalism or other jobs as well, because we want to make sure that we have that underrepresented gender getting the opportunities that they have been denied for generations, and that their mothers and grandmothers never had an opportunity to do, and now they do, thankfully. So I'm there for the helping hand, but I'm also there as well for men, young men, absolutely, and in terms of helping them as well.
So, Christina, unfortunately, you answered my next question, unknowing to Marcia, because I wanted to ask you how, are you satisfied with where women are in sports journalism? Obviously, you're not. Further to that point, are you also unhappy with the roles you see with women playing in it? Because oftentimes you would see women being asked to either be a host or be a field reporter, but too often, I guess, you're not seeing women as commentators or women as analysts. Does this bother you, or do you see this same point across the country?
These are great questions asking, and thank you for all of them. And absolutely, I want women to be in charge. Women can be in charge, right? I mean, let's face it, right? I think I want to see women in the booth. I want to see women calling games, play-by-play announcing, and/or color commentary. And we're seeing more of it. We certainly have seen women doing commentary on college football, and from the booth, and or play-by-play. We certainly see women like someone like Doris Burke, who's announcing NBA games, men's games. And I want to see, I personally love to see more of that. In other words, women who are, we're not even thinking gender. They're just the best voice on that broadcast. And if it's a men's game, great. And we've seen it in golf. We've seen it with football, soccer, where we see women commentators on men's events. We need to see more of that. And we certainly see and hear a lot of women's voices on women's events, and that's great too. But let's face it, women athletes, are prolific. I mean, we see women throughout the world. We see Serena Williams. We see all the other women's tennis players, Venus, and so many others. We see, of course, we see golf. We see the Olympic sports, Katie Ledecky, Simone Biles, on and on it goes. So women are now reaching out and at the very top echelon of their sport. They are the dominant stories. They're making the money. Serena Williams, obviously the greatest of all time. Katie Ledecky, one of the greatest of all time. Certainly in swimming, the most decorated female swimmer ever with worlds and Olympic championships. And Simone Biles, the greatest of all time. So it makes sense that you would then have women's voices commentating on them. We also see a lot of women now, more than ever before, as columnists for newspapers. And that's from San Francisco to New York to Boston. Obviously, USA Today, we have several women writing columns. It's a Miami Herald. I mean, we do see more and more. Again, I'm worried about losing jobs, and that's, again, the economy, not sexism at all. And if it is sexism, then those editors need to make better decisions on who they get rid of when they do have to make cuts. But your heart breaks for all of that with COVID and also the economy and just in general, how tough the newspaper business can be. But I'm very bullish. I'm very excited about the opportunities we see. And I do think we should see more women in positions of authority. Right now, the sports editor of USA Today is a woman. And we had a man before that. And I may have missed one person, but then before that, it was another woman. And so there really are women who are leading, and we need to see more women in charge of networks. Molly Solomon, Golf Channel, is run by a woman. She's also in charge of NBC Olympics. I've known Molly since she was in college answering phones at the Washington Post. So it is happening. And Billie Jean King has said it far better than I could, that we need to have women in charge making the decisions, because then you will not see the sexism as much, and you will see more and more women being shown on air, or at least the decisions will be much more equitable than what we've seen over the years when you have men who are now probably mostly retired or gone, but men who were born in the 20s and 30s who didn't think women's sports, that didn't give the time of day to women's sports. Well, now we've got women in charge, women writing columns, women running sports sections, sports departments and all of that, and then more women in the booth. And we need to see more and more of that. And let's keep in mind, last thought on this, the old canard, the old story was, well, men don't want to hear a woman's voice on sports. Well, that is so long gone, especially when you consider this. Even the NFL, basically 45% is, I think, the number now that we use. 45% of the fan base of the National Football League is women. It's almost 50-50. So if the idea is you're trying to play to men, well,
alienating your fan base. Yeah.
And think about the 12-year-old girl on the couch watching sports with her mom and dad. Well, that girl's going to grow up to be owning her own business or running for office, being a governor or a senator, or maybe running for president. She'll be a businesswoman. She'll be making the decisions in her household when she's 40 or 50 years old. You want her to keep watching sports, and she just might keep watching sports if she hears a woman's voice. So we are not playing to the frat house as much anymore and playing to that 12-year-old girl on the couch who is going to be a consumer for the next 70 years.
And Christine, you touched on the economic fallout of the pandemic, and there's a school of thought that women's sport in particular will be hardest hit. Do you agree with that?
That's a great question also. I hope not, but we know that that the world's not going to look the same. Things are not going to be the same, and it's very sad. And your heart breaks. I said that already, but your heart breaks for so many people. People have lost their jobs, sports that are stopped, kids that aren't able to play sports right now, kids that aren't able to go to school right now, and that's the lucky ones. People who've lost their jobs, people who don't have food. Right? I mean, that's happening all across the United States and obviously many other places around the world as well. But certainly one of the concerns among many, many concerns, and I would put hunger and employment even as more of a concern, clearly, than sports. But since we're talking sports here, the thought that women's sports are potentially going to get short shrift on this is a concern. We wonder what's going to happen if college sports are not played this fall, the economic impact of that, and sports might need to be cut, college sports opportunities. So far, Title IX is obviously a very, very strong defender of women's sports. It's the law of the land, has been for 48 years now. But so men's sports might be cut more than women's, but still, no one wants that. Women's pro sports, some of them are just getting going. I mean, obviously tennis is set, golf is set, but even the LPGA just came back the last 2 weeks in my hometown of Toledo, Ohio. The PGA Tours, the men's tour, has been around now for several months. So it's been a tough road to go for the LPGA Tour. So to your point, that's tough. And they've lost a lot of money in a lot of tournaments this year. Hopefully the sponsors will be there. They've said they'll be back next year, but that's tough. So I think if you are, in general, women's sports are not quite as established in general as men's sports, then there's a real risk of it being tougher to hang on and also having less right now. And again, the golf proves it. The men's golf has got much more than the LPGA, although the LPGA now is back. And I'm proud of my hometown of Toledo for providing 2 tournaments, not just 1, but 2, including Inverness Club, which hosted a tournament. They just kind of made it out of nothing just to give them a chance and an opportunity to play for $1 million purse, which is not a lot, but it was nice. And so women's soccer, we want to make sure the momentum keeps going with the Pro Women's Soccer League coming off the World Cup in the U.S. and obviously other countries care very much about women's football, women's soccer. We don't want to lose that Women's Pro League, and the momentum it is having. I don't think there's a danger of that. They had a nice tournament. The WNBA is having a really good season in the bubble, and like the NBA is, and we want to make sure that momentum continues. You don't want to lose that, and I think there certainly is a danger that those leagues that have been around less time, which tend to be women's leagues, are going to have a tougher climb back into what we would consider some kind of sense of normalcy over the next couple of years. But I think it's also incumbent on us as journalists to continue to report on them and to discuss these issues, as I'm so glad you've asked about, because we want our girls to be able, and boys, to be able to look up and see strong, wonderful, athletic, female role models, not just for our girls, but for our boys, our daughters as well as our sons. And we want to make sure that continues, plus the economic opportunities for those women to play professional sports.
You touched on it briefly just now, Christine. So before Anderson Cooper gets you on this thing that we are the first to ask Christine Brennan about this. Over the weekend, the commissioners of the Power 5 schools, or Power 5 conferences, should I say, had a meeting, and it would seem that the cancellation of the football season is pretty much. What are your thoughts on that, Christine, and what have you been hearing as somebody who is on the ground?
This is a very fluid situation, Justin, and it's yes. I was telling Marcia that there was a chance I was going to be on CNN with Anderson Cooper right about the same time we're doing this, but Anderson took a backseat to you guys today.
So sorry, Anderson. But
hey, come on, you guys are the bomb. You're the one. No, they were CNN. It turned out there was no huge news today, so that's why, and I'm glad it all worked out. But yes, there's a lot of confusion right now. The Big Ten is, of course, the Great Lakes states, the Midwestern states, Michigan, Ohio State, Indiana, my alma mater, Northwestern. And we believe that they are going to postpone football to the spring. But just as everything happens, there's a lot of talk about it. A lot of people are on social media complaining. A lot of the student athletes are talking now. Coaches are angry. So it could take a while, but the medical science is there. I mean, this concern about heart-related problems after you get COVID, this is very serious. And universities cannot put students, male or female athletes, out on fields this fall to die. Now, I know people say that's dramatic, no one's going to die. Well, do we know that? Do we really know that? We know that, and if it's not, hopefully that doesn't happen. But if it's not a student athlete, is it a coach who's in his 50s or 60s? Is it a referee? Is it a custodial worker because the stadium is open? Who gets it? Is it someone who takes it home and then they're a family member? I mean, we've all lived this over several months, and we know how dangerous this is, and there's so much we don't know about the virus. And so my sense is the Big Ten is going to end up doing the right thing and listen to science and facts and postpone the season because they want to keep their student athletes safe. I think the Pac-12 will also do that. I think, frankly, they'll all end up folding up eventually and pulling the plug, but it looks like the Southeastern Conference, no surprise, would probably be the last to pull the plug. Yeah. And boy, that's really risky because now I understand that the wanting kids to play sports. My goodness, there's a family member for me who is a great athlete, and I want to watch her play her sport this fall, and in high school, and it's been pushed back, and we don't even know how that's going to play out. So I know the feeling. But is that really worth the threat to someone's life or well-being, or even just the sickness, not death, but the concern, so much we don't know about the lungs and the heart, and what happens to a young athlete. Right now, Eduardo Rodriguez, the Boston Red Sox pitcher, is 27 years old, got COVID, recovered, and now they're concerned about his heart, and he is not playing the rest of the Major League Baseball season. That's just one example. There's an Indiana University football player whose mother has gone on Facebook talking about her concerns after he had COVID, her concerns about his heart. Now there's reporting that there are several other Big Ten athletes that people are concerned about after COVID with their hearts. I love sports, love sports. I don't know how you can even begin to compare the concern about missing sports for a year, which is important. And the money it makes is really important, the TV money for football, but versus the life of a 18 or 19, 20, 21, 22-year-old. I just don't get it. So we shall see how it plays out. But my sense is that we'll see a lot of the big conferences postponing everything to the spring.
Before you jump in, Marcia, as we're on the topic, we on this show have a bit of we tend to criticize the NCAA a lot here. So my question to you then, especially with the SEC, as you know, so adamant about playing football, does it speak to how the NCAA views these student athletes? Does it show up that well, we are viewing them as just labor, considering that you're willing to have most of the students off campus doing online courses, but yet here you're trying to justify these players or athletes, coming on campus to play football.
Certainly what we're hearing from some of the Southeastern Conference is like, we want these kids to play and this is their opportunity and all of that. No doubt. For those schools that are balking at pushing it back, they want the money and they want to have these athletes out on the field for TV, for the show, for the pure entertainment of everybody else. Now, the kids want to play too, I get that. Mm-hmm. But that's why you have adults. Because they're 18 to 22 years old, and there should be adults in the room that make the decisions. Obviously, college football players want to play. No kidding. Little kids would love to have, cookies for dinner, of course, but that they don't get that, right? You have people looking over them. And so I think those schools, and I'll say Northwestern, my alma mater, I think, obviously, I believe very strongly is looking at science and looking at the facts here and very concerned about student athletes and their well-being in the wake of the coronavirus and COVID-19. If schools aren't as concerned, then yes, what are you doing? What are you doing? And don't even try to tell us that you care about the health and well-being of your student athletes because you just want them on the field for, to exploit them or whatever for our entertainment. But I don't think it's a blanket thing. I think there are schools doing things the right way and looking out for their student athletes. I do. That's why we saw the Big Ten basically looking like they're going to postpone, because those schools really, I think, want to do it the right way. We'll see. I'm not sure every single one of them does. We're hearing some don't, some do. But I think that the schools, I think we'll see schools around the country, and we already are. The Mid-American Conference, Mountain West just postponed, and of course the Ivy League. And as the Ivy League goes, so goes the nation. I really believe that. They shut down back in March, and the rest of the nation followed. Yeah. The Ivy League, about a month ago, shut down and said no fall sports. And my guess is that they know what they're talking about. They're the smartest people in the room usually, and and there's a reason why. We'll see. But the Ivy League, again, showed the way, and I think is certainly the North Star for everybody making the right decision at the time that they made it.
Well, of course, this is a very fluid situation, as you mentioned earlier, and we will be sure to keep an eye on it. But Christine, I want to thank you so very much for joining us right here on This Just In. We had a wonderful conversation, and I'm sure our viewers enjoyed it as well. I want to take this opportunity to, when things are settled, to invite you to come to Barbados. Enjoy all that we have to offer here, because I know you've never been.
That's right.
So that's an open invitation from us here at This Just In to you to visit us here in Barbados. But thank you so much for joining us once again, and stay safe over there in Washington, D.C.
Well, to both of you, thank you, Marcia and Justin. Thank you. I will take you up on your offer. I promise you, when everything settles down, I will jump on a plane and see your beautiful, beautiful country and island. And thank you again for the great questions. Congratulations on a wonderful show. And again, it's been my honor to be with you. Have a good night.
I don't have a mark on my face, and my upset son enlisted, and I just turned 22 years old. I must be the greatest. I told the world, I talk to God every day. If God's with me, he no matter. You're just the same. I shook up the world. I shook up the world. I shook up the world. I shook up the world.
I said, can I be a legend? Search your soul and answer me this question. Do you think I have what it takes to be great, but still be humble and learn from my mistakes? Shit.